province where the rain could be heavy. So during the afternoon and evening, rain and strong winds will affect many northern and northwestern areas. Elsewhere, though, it should stay dry. And that's how your weather is shaping up for the rest of your Monday.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
A very good morning from a turbulent Conservative Party conference. This morning, the government has U-turned on a signature measure of its mini-budget. We'll be exploring that in depth, along with the direction of this government and indeed its very sustainability. All that coming up after the headlines.
A very good morning. It's 9:30. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date today on GB News. Well, a government U-turn this morning. The new Chancellor has abandoned plans to scrap the top rate of income tax for the highest earners. The Prime Minister and Kwasi Kwarteng have admitted the plan to abolish the 45p tax rate, only made public 10 days ago, has become a distraction from their mission to grow the economy. Both Liz Truss and Mr Kwarteng say, we get it and we've listened. It's after criticism from economists, several Conservative MPs and former Cabinet Ministers following a tumultuous week in the markets. Northern Ireland Minister Steve Baker has apologised for what he called his ferocious stance during Brexit negotiations with the EU. The Conservative MP said he was sorry that he and his colleagues had not always acted in a way that encouraged Ireland and the EU to trust the UK. Well, he's now asking MPs to act with humility to restore relations with Ireland, admitting those relations are not where they should be. International news now, and Brazil's presidential election is heading for a runoff vote after neither of the two candidates secured 50% in the first round. The incumbent president, Jair Bolsonaro, will face now the former president of Brazil, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, who had been anticipated to win the vote. Voters will now go to the polls again in 4 weeks' time. We're on your TV, online and DAB Plus radio. It's GB News. Now let's go back to the briefing with Tom.
A very good morning to you, live from the heart of Conservative Party conference here in Birmingham. It's been a turbulent few hours indeed. Not many people were expecting that this government would perform quite such a large U-turn so early on in its time in office. Let's dive straight into the detail here. I'm delighted to be joined by the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Chris Philp. First of all, why the U-turn?
Good morning, Tom. Well, the Prime Minister and the Chancellor have been listening. They've been listening to public opinion, and they've been listening to parliamentary opinion as well. And it's become clear, I think, to them that there is significant opposition to the measure, and they've decided it has become a distraction from the wider package of measures in the growth plan. This particular element is only around about 5% of the growth plan by value, less than 1/20th, and they've decided that in order to make sure we don't have this distraction on this particular relatively small package in the growth plan, they've decided see in the fullness of time people's incomes growth being unleashed, which will lead to higher wages, higher earnings, better jobs being created, and of course ultimately the tax revenues being sustainably generated to fund our public services.
What does this say about the rest of government policy? That simply when something difficult comes along, when something that might be unpopular, and earlier enough the Prime Minister has said that she's willing to be unpopular, is that all melting away? Is this going to be what the government does whenever there's the slightest bit of opposition?
No, I don't think so. But I think the government is a government that listens. It's taken the temperature, and it's we are a democracy and we're a parliamentary democracy. So listening both to the public and of course to members of Parliament is very important. That's what they've done. This had become a distraction from what is a really good plan. There are many bits of this plan that haven't even been reported in the last week and a half. I was with a group of SMEs yesterday, and when I drew their attention to the annual investment allowance being increased to £1 million, they were really delighted by that. It'll help SMEs, small businesses across the UK invest in our country's future, but that measure hasn't even been reported. If you look at what the CBI, the Confederation of British Industry, the Federation of Small Businesses and the British Chambers of Commerce have been saying, they've welcomed this growth plan. What we now need to do is get on and implement it to make sure that people's wages can increase, and of course it contains tax cuts for everybody. It contains tax cuts for all 30 million of the United Kingdom's working people, which is really important.
But on this 45p rate, I believe we can have a look at what the Institute for Fiscal Studies said about it last week after the growth plan was published. They said this measure could be revenue neutral. Cutting this rate of tax might not cost the country a penny, indeed could help grow the economy, could grow the tax base, could help make everyone better off. What's the point in the Conservative Party if it can't deliver tax cuts that could make people better off?
Well, you've made the point about the importance of tax cuts to make people better off, and of course also to stimulate economic growth. And as I said, this particular measure we're talking about, the 45p band, was only a very small part. It was less than 1/20th, less than 5% of the package. We're freezing corporation tax, which was due to go up from 19% to 26%. We're keeping it at 19%, which is highly competitive. We're reversing the national insurance increase. We're bringing forward the reduction of the cut to 19p
all of
base
these
rate.
Measures put together bring the tax burden down.
That's right, they do.
Down to what it was in 2018.
That's right.
Much higher than it was under the last Labour government. Indeed, your top rate of tax is going to be higher than every month bar one under the 13 years of Labour government. Are you comfortable with that as a Conservative Treasury Minister, presiding over a higher tax burden than Gordon Brown or Tony Blair?
Well, I'm comfortable with the fact that this new administration has come into office and it is reducing taxes. We were going to see taxes go up significantly under the plans that we inherited just a few weeks ago, and we have rapidly reversed many of those plans. We've talked about the corporation tax increase, we've talked about reversing the national insurance increase. Those measures are far larger in terms of their financial value than the 45p rate. So this is a new government that is reducing taxes straight away. Of course we'd like to go further, but we'll do that in a way that is fiscally responsible, and that's why we're going to have the OBR forecast published in just a few weeks' time. And the purpose, by the way, of reducing those taxes is not just to alleviate the burden on working families, rich and poor, poor alike, because these tax cuts we're going ahead with benefit everybody, all 30 million workers and many, many businesses as well. It's also to stimulate higher growth. And once we get higher growth, that increases the tax yield, the amount of tax paid in cash terms, which in turn creates opportunities to reduce tax. But we're going to be measured about that. We're going to do this in a way that is fiscally responsible. We think just now the measures we've announced are, frankly, the only ones that are affordable, fiscally affordable. So, we're going to do these and we're going to get the economy growing and then take it from there.
You talk about what's affordable, and if we look back last week at what the International Monetary Fund said in this most extraordinary statement that they put out, a lot of people focused on what they interpreted to be the criticism of tax cuts there. But I was interested in one particular line in this IMF statement, which said it criticised large and untargeted fiscal packages. Large and untargeted fiscal packages. Now, to me, that can only mean one thing. This enormous energy plan that could cost up to £150 billion, that could be relatively open-ended. We know that the government's committed to it for 2 years. We don't know the price of energy over the course of that 2 years. And of course, it's freezing the bills not just for the poorest, but for the very richest as well. Surely that's less fiscally sound than a £2 billion tax cut.
Well, so we certainly make no apology for the energy price guarantee. Just a few weeks ago, households were facing the very real prospect of their energy bills going up to £5,000, £6,000, even £7,000 per year. And on her second day as Prime Minister, Liz Truss took decisive action to make sure that can't happen, to make sure the average household pays no more than £2,500. That was a hugely significant intervention, protecting, as you say, every single family and indeed businesses in this country. It'll also have the effect of reducing inflation by 5 percentage points compared to what it would otherwise have been. And I think protecting all households, rich and poor, as you say, from those enormous energy bills is the right thing to do, because this is a government that stands with everybody, rich and poor alike. And I think, frankly, that energy price guarantee is probably the most significant thing the government has done so far. It's certainly far more significant. It'll do far more to help families up and down the country than the 45p issue, which is a relatively small part of what is a much bigger and much more important package that will help everybody and get the whole economy growing.
A universal price cap, a higher tax burden than any year under the last Labour government.
But a much
lower tax burden than was planned. Promises that were made. What's particularly conservative about this government?
Well, what is conservative is the fact that in the first couple of weeks in office, we've taken decisive action to prevent the tax burden going up, as it would have done under the alternative administration and indeed under the previous administration. Now, obviously we believe in lower taxes, but we've got to do that in a way that is fiscally responsible. We've taken these decisive early steps. The measures add up to, well, you can see the blue book yourself, they add up to very significant amounts of money in lower taxation. We're reducing taxes for everybody, rich and poor alike. That'll help people in the cost of living situation we're in. It will also get the economy growing and thereby help people earn higher wages in the future. We've taken decisive action to lower taxes. We've done it quickly. We've got a growth plan. The plan is welcomed by business organisations, big and small. And I think when we deliver that higher level of growth that we're intending to via the growth plan, it's something not just British businesses, but the British public will welcome as well. They will judge us by results.
Well, Chris Philp, Chief Secretary to the Treasury, thank you so much for joining us here on the briefing this morning. Now, of course, this U-turn followed a number of senior members of Parliament, indeed former cabinet ministers, speaking out against the proposals in the growth plan yesterday. Let's have a listen to what former cabinet minister Michael Gove had to say about the proposals.
I think that there is inherent risk, if you were a Conservative, in saying that you can borrow and borrow and borrow. This risk might pay off, but I am concerned by what it says about the core Conservative message of prudence. And the second concern that I have is that if we are to cut taxes, and I touched on it earlier, and there is a case, very good case, very respectable case, for relieving the burden on some, then it should not be people who are already wealthy.
Well, some people argue that Michael Gove managed to take down not one, but two prime ministers, really help in that. Could he be on his way to a third? That was quite clearly an influential intervention. I'm delighted to be joined now by Conservative commentator, senior GB News contributor Tim Montgomery. Tim, did you expect this to happen?
No, and I don't think the newspapers expected it either, Tom. And I think one of the problems the government will now face is you have newspapers like The Telegraph and The Mail telling their readers in this morning's editions that Liz Truss was sticking to the 45p tax plan. They won't like to have been humiliated in front of their readers. I think this was a decision taken very late last night. I think the Chief Whip has been talking to Conservative MPs at this conference and suddenly really aware of the scale of the opposition within the Conservative Parliamentary Party to the 45p issue. So despite, on the BBC yesterday, Liz Truss saying she was going to stick to this policy, they U-turned very late last night.
It's interesting, we were all sent a press release from the Treasury yesterday, embargoed until 10:30 last night, saying that the Chancellor today in his big speech is going to say that we're sticking with the plan. 2 hours later, that all fell apart. Is this simply a maths issue? Is this simply a party that to some extent has become ungovernable?
Well, that's the real fear for the Conservative Party now. And the only way I think Liz Truss can address this is change the way that she's been governing the Conservative Party.
For the last 2 weeks?
I think they began to think the rules didn't apply to them. So, for example, Liz Truss wasn't giving broadcast interviews, really, during the leadership campaign, the Tory leadership campaign. And then when she won the leadership, she didn't really appoint any Sunak supporters to her top team. You know, when you're a winner, you appoint, largely your own people to the top team, but you include some people from the rival camp to build the broad church. She almost included nobody in her top team from the Sunak side. And then I think they had the mini budget. Again, they didn't think the rules applied to them anymore. They thought they could do almost anything they wanted without the Office of Budget Responsibility, without anyone, really a cabinet being pre-briefed. And I think they've realised the laws of political gravity still apply. And whether they now go and listen to their backbenchers, listen to conventional economic organisations so that they build their policies on rock rather than sand, she has a chance if she changes the way she behaves. If she carries on behaving as she did, then it's sort of, how long will it be until Boris is back? 3 months or 6 months?
Is the modern Conservative Party to the left of Tony Blair?
It's a fascinating question, and I think, how long have we got to answer it? But I think your questions that you just asked Chris Philp on tax were absolutely on the money. Where is the Conservative Party on economic competitiveness? Not just, reversing 2 years of tax cuts, but potentially reversing 10 years of tax cuts. But on issues like Brexit, on those big national identity issues, I think the Conservative Party is still to the right of Tony Blair, but sometimes I worry too.
It is so peculiar to see that this became such a touchstone issue, given that we know that the IFS has said that the 45p to 40p reduction could indeed be revenue neutral. Yeah. It seems that this isn't a fiscal issue. This is an issue of emotion, not of hard cash, but of how people feel. Is that a sensible way to govern?
Look, I don't know what you were getting from activists yesterday, Tom, but when I was talking to them, they don't mind selling a top rate of income tax, potentially in normal times. But knocking on someone's door and explaining to someone during the middle of an energy price crisis that they're having to find more money to pay for basic bills, but the Tories could cut taxes for the top earners in the country. That was what Tory members were worried about. I think in normal times you could sell it.
Be revenue neutral. It's just that it's too complicated to explain. Is that the issue?
I think that is the key issue. But for some people, it's also a question of solidarity. A sense is, are the rich paying their fair share? And yes, you say you may get more money from a tax cut, but would you really? And I think there is some doubt that when you cut the top rate of tax from 80 to 60%, it did produce more money. When it went down from 60 to 40, you got more money. But 45p to 40, I think people are less sure about the economics of that.
So let's look beyond this particular mini-budget, because we're expecting over the next few weeks to get what was once called Operation Rolling Thunder. I think they've ditched that name now, of a series of supply-side reforms. Reform to childcare, reform to migration, reform to planning.
Yep.
All of these different areas, some of them incredibly contentious. What does the last 24 hours say about the likelihood of being able to roll out that ambitious tranche of supply-side reform?
Well, look, first of all, it should say, and I think you and I probably agree on this, Tom, it's necessary. You know, the world is looking at Britain and not thinking that we are the dynamic economy that we were after the Thatcher years. So something has to be done to ensure that inward investors want to come back to Britain to create the jobs that we all need. But if we're going to do contentious stuff of the kind that you've just outlined, Liz Truss needs to sit round with people like Michael Gove, people who form the government's majority, and check that there is enough understanding between them that actually this will pass the House of Commons. There's no point Liz Truss standing up, being bold, promising to change the world, but not having the votes in her back pocket. So she needs to be more consensual. And if she learns that from this episode, perhaps some good will come of it.
Looking at the numbers, it only takes around 35 Conservative MPs to overturn the government's majority, sizable though it is. Just finally in this conversation, is Liz Truss able to make those alliances, or are there simply some people in the parliamentary party, perhaps too many people in the parliamentary party, who simply see a target on her back?
I think the opinion poll that we had last week, when YouGov found that the Conservatives were 33% behind, has frightened Conservative MPs to death. I think they are very worried about whether Liz Truss can take them to election victory. If you are seen as a winner, you can command the confidence of backbench MPs. They'll give you the benefit of the doubt. But if they don't think you're a winner, they'll be more rebellious. And so in a way, the first thing that she needs to do, particularly with the party conference speech in 2 days' time, is show that she still has an ability to connect with the British people. If she doesn't have that connection, I think we will be talking very soon about a change in leader.
Blimey, that is a strong prediction there. But Tim Montgomery, thank you, as always, for your analysis on the briefing this morning. Now, I think we should bring you the words of the Chancellor of the Exchequer in a statement this morning. I believe we can get this up on screen. Explaining his screeching U-turn, the Chancellor said this: "From supporting British businesses to lowering the tax burden for the lowest paid, our growth plan sets out a new approach to build a more prosperous economy. However, it's clear that the abolition of the 45p tax rate has become a distraction from our overriding mission to tackle the challenges facing our country. As a result, I'm announcing we are not proceeding with the abolition of the 45p tax rate. We get it, and we have listened." Well, those are the words of the Chancellor this morning, but as we've been discussing, this was not the largest part of the growth plan. By far outstripping the £2 billion estimated spend on reducing the top rate of tax was the up to £150 billion being spent on freezing energy prices. Now, many different countries, particularly in this part of the world, are facing this shared challenge of energy security, particularly as we enter into what could be a particularly cold winter. Has the policy of this government hit the right mark? And what does it mean for all of us in the UK? I'm delighted to be joined here live in Birmingham by Angela Knight, the former chair of Energy UK. And I suppose the first question here has got to be, what happens to usage? If we've got a price freeze, a price cap, and people use the same amount of energy as we were using before, but there's less energy coming into the country, there's less gas flowing through the pipes in Europe, does that mean we're going to face blackouts?
No, I don't think we will at all. First of all, on the price cap itself, It's a cap on the unit price of electricity, the unit price of gas, and the charges to connect to the network. So the more you use, the more you pay. The less you use, the less you pay. And one of the things that has happened, I think, across this last 6 months, as the worry has increased and increased about what's going to happen to my gas bill, my electricity bill, and so on, is that everyone has looked very carefully at their own consumption. And even though, the average household, whatever that might be, is expected not to pay more than $2,500, it is actually $2,100, because that £400 automatically comes off. Nevertheless, it's substantially more than last year. And so the target of where people are now looking is, can I be more careful, either about the temperature that I'm running my house at, how long I have the heating on, or just simply turning off more lights or whatever. So I do think that overall we will be using less as households, and industry, of course, is looking at it even more closely than we are as domestic consumers.
So there's still that incentive structure, although perhaps a less strong incentive than if energy bills were 3 or 4 times higher.
Yeah, that's right.
There are some countries in Europe, though, that are looking at energy rationing. Germany has said this, Spain has said this. Is it credible to suggest that simply through voluntary action we will avoid that sort of rationing that's going on in the continent?
The answer is yes, it is credible. You see, Germany, for example, took all its gas, as you know, from Russia. Yes, it's got some storage, but it hasn't got any ports that can accept liquefied natural gas, the tankers. In fact, what we have been doing in this country, the tankers have been coming into the UK, we've been unloading them, gasifying them, shoving in the pipe and sending it to Europe. So the UK has really played its part in getting some of that storage full in Europe. But nevertheless, even though its storage is in a much better place, Germany, of course, has done a much worse job of its energy policy over the years than we have. I mean, it's only recently had a sort of proper transmission network. The different parts of the country have been a bit more isolated. It's shut down its nuclear and its coal. So the whole problem that Germany has got means that it cannot actually fulfill what its previous demand was. And so it's talking and is in fact doing the actions of shutting down power to, first of all, public buildings during certain times, and is talking strongly with industry about what to do with contractual interruptions. Same will take place in Italy, same will take place in Spain. Some, no doubt, will do it in a more structured way like Germany, others will be in a bit more ad hoc, which is going to be even worse. Here we are, of course, still connected to the North Sea. We take about 50% of our gas out of the North Sea. We've got long-term contracts with Norway. We import 10-15% of gas. We've got the not only the ports but the long-term contracts. It's going to be difficult. No two ways about it. It's going to be difficult, and we might be close sometimes on electricity, on the actual power. But I think that we're sufficiently secure to get through the winter.
On that electricity question,
yes,
we're expecting this to not be a particularly windy winter. Some of the weather forecasts, the long-range weather forecasts that we've seen, are showing that it might be fairly still. And we do generate sometimes quite a bit of electricity now through wind turbines. Is the fact of not that much wind coming over the next few months going to be an issue?
Yes, it is. And you've actually hit a very valid point, because there's from about late January through to sort of end of February, you have this anticyclone sits across Europe. It's cold, it's not particularly sunny, and it's not particularly windy. And we all want everything to work. We want our industry on, and that is the point at which the power question really, really comes into play. Now, we're talking with keeping more of our nuclear generation running than had been the case. So that's good. We still have got 2 coal-fired power stations, so we've got that in place. But that is the time to look, how are we going to get through this? And I suspect there may be some staggering of start times of business, because, the big factories, they turn on, the 6 a.m. shift or the 7 a.m. shift all at the same time. Stagger that a bit, and you don't have quite so much of a pull on the grid. grid. So do I think there might be some fancy footwork around there? The answer is yes, but I still think we'll make it.
Really, really interesting stuff. Fascinating to see how we compare to those other European countries as well. Angela Knight, thank you so much for joining us here live from Birmingham, from the heart of Conservative Party Conference. That's it for me this morning on The Briefing. I'm back tomorrow at 9:30 as always. But up next, it's To The Point with Bev Turner. And before then, we'll get a chance to see some of these shorter range weather forecasts.
Looking ahead to today's weather, and the UK is looking mostly fine this morning after a locally foggy start, although rain will arrive in the northwest. Let's take a look at the details. So cloud will move in to affect Cornwall and parts of South Devon by lunchtime, although it will stay dry across southwest England and there'll be some bright spells in places. The southeast of England will be dry with gentle winds too, and here bright spells will lift temperatures to around 19 Celsius, 66 Fahrenheit. A fair amount of clouds likely to affect Wales, but most places should remain dry with a slight southerly breeze beginning to develop. There'll also be a fair bit of cloud across the Midlands, so any sunshine will be quite fleeting and it will be quite mild for early October with temperatures climbing into the high teens. Across the northeast of England, southerly winds will gradually pick up, and although it will stay dry, there will be a lot of cloud around during the middle part of the day. One or two bright spells are possible across the east and southeast of Scotland, but further west, wet and windy weather will be edging in from off the Atlantic. It'll be windy across Northern Ireland as well, with generally cloudy skies and some outbreaks of rain, most notably across western parts of the province where the rain could be heavy. So during the afternoon and evening, rain and strong winds will affect many northern and northwestern areas. Elsewhere, though, it should stay dry. And that's how your weather is shaping up for the rest of your Monday.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite